The Lamenters. The galaxy of the Warhammer setting is a dark and terrible place. A bloody fresco of never-ending tyranny, conflict, and hate. The tale of the Lamenters is the tale of the Imperium of mankind itself. A bright and shining new tomorrow that was birthed into an age of horror. A noble thing that was twisted by the times it was born into. For the Lamenters are in fact the most cursed of all of the Space Marines who ever bestrode the galaxy. A galaxy that in a very real and demonstrably quantifiable way that despises them. It is the 41st millennium. The Imperium of mankind rules vast tracts of the Milky Way galaxy, yet they do so not by dint of virtue or commerce, ingenuity or diplomacy. They do so by force of arms alone. And the greatest example of this military might must surely be the greatest of our number, the Emperor's own Angels of Death, his Adeptus Astartes, his chapters of Space Marines. Each of these chapters is a self-contained army made up of 1,000 of these post-human super-beings. No more, no less. But the human hegemony is not unchallenged, and thus, at times, of the 1,000 chapters of Space Marines, some fall by the wayside. They fight for all of their lives, the Space Marines, never slowing, never stopping, rarely given the time to breathe, to replenish, to replace their losses. So many chapters are simply used up in the Imperium's wars. Some fall to slow deterioration, as their genetic skill to control and maintain their gene seed stocks is not enough to face their decline. Some fall to rapid attrition in war fronts that shift and envelop entire sectors, cutting them off from the rest of their erstwhile allies, and then drowning them. Some chapters fall to the one mighty event, like a concerted attack from Xenos Raiders, dark corrupted Chaos Marines, or the Great Devourer, the Tyranids. Hence of many chapters of Marines being struck from the annals of the armies of humanity, the light devoured by the darkness. So it is that in times of great need, or to merely replace the losses accrued over time, the Imperium will order a new founding. A founding. A legendary event, only performed some 30-odd times or less in all of the 10,000 years of the Imperium's mighty reign. For to create new chapters of Space Marines is no small task, no mean feat. It takes an act of unbridled will on the part of the entire race, for to create Space Marines is to forge new armies of elite warriors, and the materials that are required are rare indeed. The construction of new fleets of ships to carry the warriors of the Emperor to where they will need to go. The creation of a new chapter monastery, a bastille of legend, bespoke, individual, unique, for the men who will call it base camp and home. The new chapters will require hardy and rugged peoples from whom to draw their recruits. They will need the very best of candidates, the cream of humanity, to apply and then be tested beyond the depths of mortal tolerance. For only the unbreakable can stand in the battle lines of the Astartes. The Imperium must select correct gene seed, stable and true, to be the furnace that powers the transformation of mortal man to demigods of battle. Their arms and munitions and weapons of war must be created, but also then supported for all of the years the chapter plows the void in search of enemies of the Imperium. And all of this is just the tip of the iceberg. The process itself can take many decades, sometimes even as long as centuries, to prepare. So founding is not done lightly. cannot be authorized by any but the highest executive body in the entire realm, the High Lords of Terror. To even gain an audience to propose such a colossal act of will and endeavor can itself take decades to merely be footed as a possibility before it can ever be ratified. And thus are all foundings events of moment, of deep gravitas. For they are also an admittance to the people of humanity, by all of humanity, that their legendary warriors are not infallible, and they are not immortal. And thus a founding can be viewed with deep concern by the conservative, those timid rulers who wish to project the strength they do not possess. The time of the founding of the Lamenters was dark indeed, and thus, in year 991 millennium 35, the 21st founding was finally ratified and realized. But it was unlike any founding before or since, with obvious exception of the Indomitus founding. It was massive in scope, containing the means for many new chapters of Space Marines to be created, yet it went beyond the usual remit, the tried and tested pattern of a founding. Some say that the gene seed that was chosen was somehow mutated by accident. Some say it was a warp storm that erupted at the most inconvenient point, a warp intrusion that soured all of the seed and made the resultant Marines and their chapters cursed. Some say that there was a far more mundane origin and reason for the resultant chapters and their dark fates. For many believe that the Magos and Biologi of the Mechanicus gene-right genitors tinkered with the strands of DNA, attempting what would be ever before and ever after considered sacrilegious. They attempted to improve on the work of the Emperor himself, the master of mankind. They tried to create better Marines, and in this, their hubris, they were undone. For, as it is known, no mere mortal can walk in the footsteps of the gods, and by doing so, attempting it, by meddling with the divine perfection of the Emperor's design, they opened the door to failure, to corruption. The chapters that are still known to hail from that founding are thus: the Black Dragons, the Blood Gorgons, the Firehawks, the Flame Falcons, the Minotaurs, the Sons of Antaeus, and of course, the Lamenters. But each and every one of these chapters, and those lost to the sands of time, were not quite right. They were cursed. The Black Dragons are mutants with overactive osmodula. The Blood Gorgons fell to chaos and its mutations within a century of their creation. The Firehawks, who were lost in the warp, and some believe transformed into the Legion of the Damned, though this is highly debatable. The Flame Falcons were also declared excommunita traitores, and it was the very sons of the blood of the Emperor himself, the Grey Knights, who had to put them down. The Minotaurs are also here, but we shall discuss them in greater depth in a later entry. And the Sons of Antaeus, huge Marines that some state must have come from Death Guard traitor gene seed due to their resilience, but it now seems more likely that they were in fact a very early attempt at making Primaris Marines. So the hand of Belisarius' call lingers in the picture also, as faded as its image is, as hard to confirm. And of course, the Lamenters. The Lamenters were born from the blood. They were of the gene seed of Sanguinius, the angel, the 9th Primarch, and progenitor of the Blood Angels Legion. And in them it was hoped that the future could actually be brighter. For a few mere centuries, all of the blood held their breath. They dared to hope. For these Lamenters did not seem to suffer from the dark curse that hung over all of the other Marines of the line. They were all infected with two separate corruptions. The first was one hardwired into their very DNA by the Emperor, or so it was said, the Red Thirst. a thirst for blood that would rise when the battle was thickest, a mist that would fall over the warriors of the Ninth that could transform them into blood-soaked berserkers as terrible as any Khanate. But it was not the madness of battle, but the urge to drink blood that brought on this transformation. The Blood Angel who gave into this madness would become a vampire-like thing of ancient legend. Feral, terrible, completely without conscience or mind, only to recover with the blood of innocence on their hands, dripping from their lips, to then endure the shame of this, to know it could happen again, and all of the honor and courage and beauty that they had protected was befouled by their actions. Or they would need to be summarily put down by their own brothers, a permanent devolution into a being of nothing more than fang and claw. A crushing curse, a true blight. Yet, but somehow, they seemed to have been programmed into their very DNA, their makeup, by the Emperor. Yet this was not even the worst of the matter, for this red thirst was compounded by the curse of Khorne during the events of the Horus Heresy. For the curse meant that the angels were to feel the last moments of their Primarch, the Angel Sanguinius. It was a waking dream state, where all of reality was twisted, a visual hallucination that overlaid all. And in those times of being in the midst of this black rage, the sons of Sanguinius would see the walls of the Imperial Palace on Terra, and look out on fields of Neverborn cavorting there. Demons. Standing behind them, the ranks and columns of the traitor legions. Or, more commonly, the Blood Angel would see all as being on the vengeful spirit, the flagship of the War Master of Evil, Horus Lupercal. And all adversaries would take on the resemblance of Horus, the being who slew the angel, and by doing so, augmented the curse of Khorne to be this black rage. For the Blood Angels were psychically gifted, and all felt the death of their lord. They felt it. So, to the lineage of the Blood, the Ninth Legion, the curse was a reality that would spell their doom. For each year the thirst became stronger, the rage more alluring. They were slowly dying out. Each year it became more of a struggle to replace members before they would die through normal combat attrition, or the additional losses to the Red Thirst and Black Rage. But the Lamenters, they were of the Blood, yet they did not seem to have these flaws at all. Their blood was pure, or so it seemed, like it had never been before, not even during the Crusade, for most believe the Emperor programmed in the Red Thirst to his sons of the Ninth. For what other possibility was there? An error from the Emperor of mankind was inconceivable. But the Lamenters did not fall to these curses. Yet, to the shame and pain of the rest of the Legion, the other chapters, the Lamenters turned their backs on their brothers. They refused to countenance affiliation with the Blood Angels themselves, or any of their other successor chapters. Eventually, their hauteur was returned 10 times over when it was discovered the dark secret of their existence. For the 21st founding was indeed cursed, so many went to chaos so swiftly. The remains mostly being mutants and fleeing to the fringes of the Imperium, so their differences did not gain them a right of extermination, the declaration of excommunicate traitores. Yet what was wrong with the Lamenters, one might ask? For there was something wrong with all of those chapters. Something strange. A trait that had been seen before. For they had a preternatural unluck, a mystic misfortune that shrouded and dogged the footsteps of the Lamenters where'er they went. For other chapters, fleets would traverse the void of space and the terrors of the warp behind great Geller fields. Some would always be lost on the way, shipping disappearing all over the Imperium in dribbles here and drops there. but the Lamenters were cursed. So often would their fields inexplicably drop, their navigators simply crumple under the force of what they saw in the warp, engines failing at the most inopportune moments. Of course, this was only one element, for their very existence was dealing with this seeming background malevolence from the very galaxy itself. Clips of bolters would regularly jam, grenades go off unbidden, heavy armor and dropships cogitators and machine spirits failing when needed most. And it was not an unprecedented scenario either, for it had been seen before, and under strangely similar circumstances. For there was another formation that was noted to experience this unluck: the Afriel strain. The Afriel strain were regiments of Imperial Guard that were made up of cloned warriors. All were taken from the genetic stock of heroes of the Imperium, such as the great Lord Macarius himself. Their effect in combat was near unsurpassed for normal baseline humans. All were as intelligent as their templates, but something was wrong with them. They had no empathy, could not interact with themselves or others, were generally despised as if they were blanks. But more than this, they also had this unluck. After battles, where they often excelled, they would suffer from mechanical breakdowns in their transport equipment, suffer the most dire of misfortune. It was as if the galaxy itself, reality in all of its splendor, rejected their very existence as unnatural. It was always as if reality itself conspired to try to remove them, like a white sail attacking invaders into its own body. Though the Lamenters did not experience this seeming detestation to the same extent as the Afriel strain, they still experienced it. And soon, this blight on them, when compounded with the revelation of the other chapters of the Founding were also cursed or traitors, made matters worse. For the other Space Marines are as diverse in their traditions, perspectives and goals as there are stars in the skies. And some of these chapters were superstitious, no matter how this flew in the face of their training and stoic front. And these chapters would not fight alongside the twisted, the cursed, or the blighted. So they certainly would not wish to fight alongside the chapters of the cursed Founding, and the Lamenters, the least of all. For their curse could be catching, is what many believed, as anyone who relied on their support in a battle was liable to be affected by the unluck of the Lamenters as they were. And thus, the Lamenters became pariahs for a long age of their existence. Cut off from their brothers of the blood by their own choice, segregated and shunned by many who should have been their staunchest allies, the Lamenters knew the heavy weight of solitude in a universe that actively sought their demise. Thus, they became melancholy, known to be Marines of few words, dour and dowdy, unlike the rest of their line. But they endured. They endured. And it is this, the merest act of their suffrage, their resilience, their valor in the face of such an unfair world, that makes them one of the most precious resources and the most noble of chapters in all of the Imperium. For it is easy to be loyal when you are loved, adored, and glorified. It is another to be loyal when you are despised, shunned, and forgotten. To remain faithful to themselves and their heritage, despite all of these trials, it has forged them into one of the most quietly respected of all of the sons of Sanguinius. And it is through them, perhaps even more than the first Founding chapter, the Blood Angels themselves, that the light of the angels shines. For in their depths of despair, every day of every week of every month of every year of every decade of every century of every millennium, from the time of their creation until the momentous events of the time of ending, they have never bent, never bowed, never surrendered. Their brothers have but two curses, and their nobility is known to be augmented by the trial. Thus, this third curse, this additional humbling misfortune, and their reaction to it, is what makes the Lamenters the best and brightest of all of their line. For they know suffering from the moment they are chosen to the moment they expire. And yet, beyond all hope, beyond all expectation, still, for 6,000 years or more, they have never, ever surrendered. Not to the thirst, not to the black rage, and not to the dark clouds of misery that consume all and can bring so many strong men down to the dust. Now, if you have been listening, not dozing off on the wisps of dream that I have soothingly spun into your ears, then you will have one question. But surely, you mentioned at the very start, Baldermort, you senescent hovering skull, that these Marines did not experience the black rage or red thirst. Alas, as happened with the Primaris Marines some 5,000 or 6,000 years later, this turned out to be a fool's hope. For though it took much longer to manifest, to arise, the Lamenters did eventually begin to fall to the red thirst, and then also to the black rage. And thus, as hated as it was for them to do so, for it was such an admittance of defeat, the chapter master opened discourse with the Blood Angels, and then formed his own death company. The Lamenters would never be close to their brother chapters, but they had to have some dialogue now, and for them, with everything else they had been given by an unkind reality, this came as another humbling blow. Yet as with everything else, all that had happened to them, they took this in their stride. They accepted the hand that had been dealt to them, and they moved forward. And now, to cover the chapter relics and organization, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Chapter Relics, the Banner of Tears. The Ordus Pronatus is one of the Orders Minoris of the Adepta Sororitas, who specialize in retrieving, guarding, studying, and repairing artifacts of value to the ecclesiarchy. They also have the responsibility of maintaining and blessing the many banners and symbols of the Order's militant. They have been called upon to reconsecrate the livery of other imperial bodies, as was the case when they repaired the chapter banner of the formerly disgraced Lamenters chapter, after its involvement in the Badab uprising. It is said that the sister Pronatus who repaired the banner wept openly as they did so terrible to contemplate were the sins of the Lamenters against the Emperor of mankind. To this day, the standard is known as the Banner of Tears. Catechist. The catechist was an ancient Infernus pistol used by Chapter Master Malachim Foros in battle during the Badab War era. The Glaive in Carmine. The Glaive in Carmine is a two-handed master-crafted power weapon in the form of a power glaive once wielded by Chapter Master Malachim Foros, again during the Badab War era. Victory's Price. Victory's Price was a master-crafted Astartes power spear. Bearing this spear is viewed as both a great honor and a heavy burden by the warriors of the Lamenters chapter. It has been wielded at the forefront of many great victories and mighty battles. However, more of its wielders have fallen in their moment of triumph than have lived to return to the chapter's halls. Though the Adeptus Astartes know no fear, the wielders of this spear tend to become concerned with ensuring that they will sell their life as dearly as possible when the time comes to pay for their success. Chapter Appearance. The power armor of the Lamenters was originally bright yellow, except for a red helm stripe and the right shoulder plate, which was decorated with white and black checks, upon which rested the chapter's badge. The most recent chapter colors include a power armor scheme that darkens the Lamenter's armor to a mustard yellow, and transfers the chapter banner and the checkered pattern to the left shoulder plate. The Lamenters display their black squad tactical specialty symbol, battle line, close support, fire support, veteran or command, on the right pauldron. A white low Gothic numeral indicating squad number is centered within it. The color of the left knee plate indicates company in accordance with the Codex Astartes. The helm stripe of the Lamenters' original color scheme was dropped completely. Chapter Badge. The Lamenters' chapter badge is a bleeding heart against the background of a black and white checkerboard pattern. Chapter Organization. The Lamenters remain at their heart a Blood Angel successor chapter, heir to the glorious and unique martial traditions and brutally effective art of war practiced by the sons of Sanguinius. They adhere to the basic tenets of the Codex Astartes, with a notional strength of 10 companies, each comprising 100 Astartes, with the usual division of 1 veteran company and 1 scout company, 4 battle companies, 1 tactical reserve, 1 assault reserve, and 1 devastator reserve company. However, like all their fellow scions of Sanguinius, there is a very great deal of fluidity between the companies, and they very rarely fight in full cohesion, save the 10th Scout Company, whose members have yet to complete their training and become full Astartes. Instead, the Lamenters employ strike forces which are created as needed from across all of the units of the chapter, giving them a high degree of flexibility in shaping their forces. Chapter recruitment was also carried out on a practical basis, with likely aspirants culled from feudal worlds and far-flung imperial colonies from where the chapter's fleet's roving course took it. The lack of typical Blood Angels deficiencies in their gene seed meant that the Lamenters were considered a Codex-compliant chapter for much of their history. Although the nature of a fleet-based chapter does require some flexibility in this regard, with isolated fleet elements being forced to adapt their tactics to the limited resources available to them. Additionally, the Lamenters fought without direct Imperial support for most of their history due to their reputation, instilling in them a sense of self-reliance uncommon in many Codex-compliant chapters who are more comfortable a part of the greater Imperial war machine. The regular outbreaks of misfortune that afflicted the chapter also resulted in a greater deal of flexibility and pragmatism developing in the Lamenters' tactical outlook, as well as in their recruitment procedures. The Lamenters' order of battle favors shock assault tactics, often delivered through a close air assault utilizing the chapter's Thunderhawk and Stormraven gunships. In terms of operational equipment and insignia, the Lamenters cleave more to the standard panoply of the Space Marines than their Blood Angels forebears and their fellow Blood Angel second founding successor chapters. Although this may be more of a matter of ease of resupply and maintenance for a fleet-based chapter with no home port that is forced to rely largely on its own artificers. The chapter retains a few cherished examples of sanguinary relics, but aside from their large number of air units, heavy tanks, such as Land Raiders and Bald Predators, are less common with the Lamenters than that of other Blood Angel successors, while suits of Terminator armor are particularly rare in the Lamenters' armory and are valued beyond price by the chapter. As with their progenitors, the Lamenters' chaplains operate as part of their overall chapter command, rather than subordinate to it in each company, as in the case with most Codex-compliant chapters. This enables the chaplains to watch for the growing problems of the Red Thirst in the chapter's ranks, while the sanguinary priesthood holds a particularly prominent role in chapter governance and is known by the Lamenters as the Calyx. It has often been observed that it is the Calyx that has had the greatest part in holding the chapter together through its many trials and misfortunes, as the sanguinary priests of the Lamenters tend not only to the physical health of the chapter's Astartes, but also the spiritual stigmata they bear. End quote. Now, this has just been a basic introduction to the origins and organization of the Lamenters. I hope to come back very soon with a much broader vision of their history, for it is so very tragic and so very rich. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Hope you've enjoyed this first installment of the history and character of the Lamenters. If so, then do consider liking and subscribing. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.